Hey you guys, just thought I'd do a follow-up to the video that I posted yesterday on how to lose the initiative. If you haven't seen that video, I really recommend it because it's so important. Maintaining the upper hand from the start of the game, particularly if you're white, and if you're playing with the black pieces, then trying to wrest the initiative off white so that you get the upper hand through the use of tempo. Really is the general idea. So wherever you can, you want to be looking for forcing moves, even from the very first moves of the game, which will make your opponent have to move a piece twice that they don't really want to move, for example, so you then get the initiative that way. So I've got a nice little game that I've just played against an opponent rated kind of mid-1200s. Yeah, so let me just take you through it because I think it's a really good example. We'll take it slowly, okay? So e4, and my opponent replies with c6, so we've got the Caro-Kann coming. There's nothing really pressuring here, so the standard move would be to play d4 and grab the center. And now e5, which is a bit odd. So normally with a Caro, I would expect d5 to come out, and then I like playing the fantasy variation with f3 to defend this pawn here. Okay, but they then play e5 out. So, it's an undefended pawn. That's one thing that you should notice. So it's really important to stop and kind of take an autistic kind of snapshot of the board. We need to improve in chess. You need to stop playing what you think the board is and start playing with what the board actually has on it. Okay, so here clearly we have an undefended pawn. If I capture the pawn, then yeah, I'd have doubled pawns. That's perfectly reasonable. But here I decided just to push c3, so that if they take, I take, and I maintain a strong center. Okay, controlling these four key squares. And another thing is it blocks off the line to the king here in case Queenie wants to jump out to a5. It also opens up a diagonal for my queen. If she wants to go that way as well, maybe look down on f7, right? Just all good general purpose opening ideas. And now we have d5. Okay, so we got quite a lot of tension going off in the board. We've got pawns looking at each other, literally squaring off in the middle. And what do you do here? So again, I simply play f3, which is the normal fantasy variation move, so that if d takes e, I can recapture with a wing pawn. Likewise, if e takes d, I can recapture with a wing pawn. So this is really the tussle for the center. Of course, this does leave open a diagonal towards my king there, but if the queen were to come out now, I can push g3, this pawn's defended, the queen would have to move again, losing tempo, i.e. losing time. Tempo is just the Italian word for time, right? That's all it means. It means losing a turn. Okay, so black now plays knight to f6, and now I capture the pawn. And this is stronger now because it comes with an attack on the knight, right? So this is a tempo winning move. The other thing that I'm also bearing in mind is, should this pawn ever capture on there, I do have a queen exchange idea. Because there's a pawn here, there's no knight coming to the c6 square, therefore there's no knight that can recapture the queen, okay? Also, the bishop isn't on that square to recapture the queen either. So, should this pawn capture, an exchange of queens makes sense because it will centralize black's king in the middle of the board. They won't be able to castle. So that does a couple of things. It restricts the king's safety, meaning that the king's kind of stuck in the middle of the board and can't quickly get towards the corners, which is where it's easier to defend. But also it's going to mean that these rooks are going to take longer to engage into the game. So let's see how it goes. So now the knight moves, okay? Now, playing the board exactly how it is, one thing you should be looking at is, okay, well this knight's just moved to the edge of the board, can't go there, can't go there, can't go there, oh, can't go there, right? The knight actually has no safe squares. And it doesn't take more than a moment to check that, okay? So now I decide to push f4. So I'm reminded of Benny Watts in the Queen's Gambit saying, "Carry Khan's old pawns, no hope." But look, this is we shouldn't be slavishly following any chess principles, but particularly the idea of development and opening, because this guy's hanging, right? He's there for the taking, there for the bullying, and if I can just keep kicking this knight around and get some of my pieces out into the board, what's not to like, okay? So he now defends the knight with a pawn. So the g-pawn's now moved, and now g4. So my move came with the discovered attack by the queen. He's defended it, and now g4. Now the knight does have one square to go to. So the knight's now moved multiple times in the game, at least 3 times in the game. And what I have is space. So I'm controlling all of these squares, right inside black's territory. Look how many squares in black's half of the board, not that one actually, I'm controlling. Again, my bishop's controlling that as well. So good start. This pawn is hanging, so bishop to g2 makes sense. I did have the option of bishop d3, but I figured this way is better in case we have pawn takes. I didn't want my bishop on here, blocking off my queen trade. Indeed, black makes another pawn move and captures on e4, and we swap off queens. So now his king is stuck in the middle of the board. All right, we have a hanging pawn here. I've got a nice advanced pawn structure. This knight's now looking awkward. Can't go here or here. It's only really got a couple of squares it can go to. And so now I'm feeling comfortable. So now what I need to be thinking about is get more pieces out into the board because I've got no development, okay? And try and get castle to finish off my opponent. Also, one thing you'll notice is, I did a video recently on which way to castle. When you have an exchange of queens like this and the king has to recapture, the king captures on d8, it makes queenside castling all the more effective because you put your rook sometimes straight on d1 or d8 if you're playing black, and that can come with check as well, which can be a really good thing. So now I simply capture the loose pawn on e4. Black plays out their other knight. Again, you see, it's one downside of having blocked off this c6 square with the pawn so early. I develop my knight. And now there's a little pawn push on h6, not entirely sure about that. So I bring out my bishop now, again wanting to keep the d-file open for my rook. And now again, black plays yet another pawn move. I guess this is, the idea of this one is to release the light squared bishop. But downside, every time you make a pawn move, you're undefending a couple of squares, right? Or 1 or 2 squares. This pawn move, it undefends c6, so I simply grab c6. Again, just looking for every opportunity. What just changed on the board, right? What is now capturable that wasn't capturable before? How can I put pressure on my opponent? How can I force my opponent to do something you don't want to do? All that kind of good stuff. So now black's being forced to move his rook and spend a move moving his rook. Okay, so now knight to d2. I didn't want to put my knight on a8. I just didn't want to tempt this and then breaking my pawns on that side because I'd like to stick my king there. So temporarily my knight's moved to the d file. Now bishop e7, so it's looking at my bishop and then behind it a knight that is defended, and then behind that a rook. So I simply move my bishop out of the way. I like this bishop and I'm thinking I want to keep the pressure on that knight. If it stays there, then after I castle, I might have ideas of moving my knight out of the way, and then we've got 2 attackers against this pinned knight here. f5 is played and I decide to capture en passant. One of the reasons is because it just puts more pressure on black. You know, it's attacking a piece, it's going to make black do something. Now, instead of defending that knight, black decides to capture my knight with a bishop, and this comes obviously with a threat on the rook. So there are options here, and this is something that you really have to sit down and think through. If I capture the knight, I'm threatening to, say, capture the rook and promote. That could be quite good. So if I capture the knight, it's going to have to recapture, then So I probably should have captured the knight here, actually. Instead, I just instinctively grabbed the bishop, and he gets the pawn back. So if we think about this, so if I take the knight, if he takes the rook, then I capture the rook and get a queen and win. If I capture the knight, bishop takes, knight takes bishop, and I've won a piece. So that was a mistake on my part there. Okay, and the pawn goes, now I castle, and it comes with an immediate check because the king has had to capture the queen on d8. King moves. h3 just defends this pawn, which I noticed was hanging previously. Yeah. So no reason to give my opponent any slack in this game, right? Even pawns and stuff like that. Although I just did. Okay, and this is a pin. So I'm attacking the knight, but also attacking the pawn behind it. Knight moves. I centralize my rook now. So I'm wanting to occupy both of these completely open central files and dominate the game. I'm only 2 pawns up at this point in time, actually. Knight now moves, but you can see now the massive difference in terms of development, control, and influence over the board that I've got from just putting my opponent on the back foot so many times, not least forcing the queen exchange. So now look at the influence that I have over the board, right? I'm controlling that file. I've got a good bishop there controlling that diagonal. I've got a good bishop on that diagonal. My knight is looking at some key squares in the center. These advanced pawns are doing a great job on the king side there as well. So grab a loose pawn. Knight comes in with half a prod at my bishop, but my bishop is defended. So now simply bishop d4, and I'm now looking at this rook, and this rook is actually now trapped. Okay, because it can't go here, it can't stay there, and obviously it can't move to g7. It's only got one safe square, which is there. But now bishop to f7, rook can't go there because of the pawn, can't go there or there bishop, there or there bishop. So the rook is actually going to fall. I grab the rook, recaptures, and now I've got options as well. I can capture this knight with the bishop, I can capture this knight with the bishop or the rook, completely dominating position, and my opponent here resigns. So let's just briefly rewind and review the opening part of this as well, looking particularly at initiative. So slightly unusual, or at least to me, Caro-Kann move order. I could have grabbed the pawn straight away at the beginning, and now that capture there with tempo coming with an attack on the knight is a forcing move, forces the piece to move again. I attack the knight again just edging that pawn up the board, forces a pawn move to defend, but then another move. You see how many free moves I'm getting here, all because of the fact that the knight is loose, that the knight is left there as a target, right? Now we develop knights all the time in chess, okay, very early on, okay, quite often on the second or even the first move, right? But this knight move here was not a good knight move, right? So don't just develop because I have to develop, right? Develop with purpose. Every move that you play should come with purpose, and this is just weakening, right? So Black could have asked himself, if I put my knight there and pawn takes, what am I going to do then? Am I going to play knight h5? Well, if knight h5, I mean g4 is even an option, good option here, attacking the knight again. There's probably a better move actually. It would have probably won the knight because knight actually had no squares. So I think this one was not as effective. But you know, my pawns are creeping up the board. Now the knight has to move again, and look at the influence that I've got now over this. So defending this pawn now with the bishop because it was undefended. Takes. Now the king's in the middle of the board, and we've only played a few moves, but look at the difference on the board. And this is the advantage that I carried straight into the middle game. right? This is the reason why black's pieces ended up hanging all over the place, because I've got so much control over the board, and the reason I've done that all stems back to this weak knight move here, I would say. Yeah, that's just unnecessary. So I think here, I think g4 would have been better, because the knight can't go there because pawn takes, can't go there because bishop takes, and can't go there because pawn takes, and that actually has nowhere to go. So I think that would have been even better. But there you go, nice little real-world case study of exactly what we've been talking about in the when thinking about initiative, particularly in the opening. So don't rush these moves, guys. Take your time over all opening moves and say, right, if I do that, what's my opponent going to do? Is that good for me? Okay, if not, find something else. Okay, there's always options. So let's just go back. Instead of this move for black, what's black got? I mean, that's an option now, right? Because then if I take, bang, black forces the exchange of queens. Okay, and then I don't know. How about this? You know, that is not as bad a situation. So if you ever watch the Grandmaster games, or look them up on the database, you will see that they don't make these loose moves in the openings, and there's also reasons why there are standard book opening lines, right? It's because this has been shown, tried and tested over centuries, have been shown to be solid. Okay, when you play beginners, and this guy's 1250 region, not really a beginner in my book, but you can expect these loose moves, and that was just not properly. It was ill-conceived. Simple as that. Okay, there you go. Thought that might be useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.